Hi, in this video we will be going over the reproductive system. So the primary sex organs in the body are the testes in males and ovaries in the females. Most people would think about the external genitalia when it comes to the primary sex organs, but they are actually the gonads, and everything else is pretty much accessory. The gonads have two important functions. One is to produce gametes, and the other is involved with producing sex hormones. Gametes are sperm cells in males and ova or eggs in females. They are produced by the process of meiosis. I'm not going to go into the details of meiosis in this video. Remember that most other cells in your body are produced by a process called mitosis. In regular cells in your body, for example, the squamous cells or anywhere else pretty much that you look, where there's genetic information, there's going to be 46 pairs of chromosomes. So humans have 46 chromosomes, not pairs, 46 chromosomes in total. These are called diploid cells. They're called diploid because if you condense the chromosomes and look at them, they come in pairs. They come in homologous pairs. So you get one chromosome from mom, another one from dad. In total, you're going to have 46 chromosomes. However, the process of meiosis produces cells that are haploid. Haploid means that they are not in pairs. So the eggs and the sperm, which are produced by the process of meiosis, result in 23 chromosomes instead of 46 chromosomes, which makes sense because eventually you're going to have the egg and the sperm come together. Each one is going to contribute 23 chromosomes to the zygote and which is going to have eventually form a cell that's going to have 46 chromosomes. Remember that your gonads are also involved with producing sex hormones. That is going to be mainly testosterone in males, estrogen and progesterone in females. I want you to keep in mind that the gonads are not the only source of testosterone and estrogen in our bodies. If you recall the endocrine system, you would remember that androgens are produced by the adrenal cortex. And androgens can become sex hormones. So a small amount of sex hormones comes from the adrenal cortex area in your body, but the big chunk of sex hormones in the human body comes from the gonads. Remember that these sex hormones are steroid-based hormones. What they do is they help with the development and function of the reproductive organs. They are involved with sexual behavior and sex drive, and they also influence development of other organs and tissues in your body. This is what gives your body certain characteristics. So if you're more feminine, you tend to have narrow jaws. Men tend to have more square-like jaws. So it just helps make those differences in a male and female body. Remember, everything else that's not the gonads is going to be the accessory reproductive organs. So this means ducts, this means other glands in the reproductive system, and also the external genitalia are all considered accessory. Let's first start with the male reproductive system. So first, I want to go over the duct system in the male reproductive system. So sperm cells are produced in the male gonads, which are testes that lie in the scrotum. And then from the testes, there's a system of ducts that's going to carry the sperm out of the body. Here are the ducts in order: epididymis, ductus deferens, also called vas deferens sometimes, the ejaculatory duct, and the urethra. Let's go ahead and take a look at them. Let's look at this picture over here. So here are the testes. This sac over here that contains it, this is called the scrotum. And we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail later. So the sperm cells are going to be produced here in the testes. Pay attention to the fact that I'm saying sperm cells and not semen. Semen is the fluid that's nourishing and taking care of sperm cells. Sperm cells are just purely the gametes. So sperm cells are actually produced in testes in these tubes called seminiferous tubules. We'll talk about them later. That's where sperm cell production begins. And then they're going to move into this structure here called the epididymis. Epididymis is right here. It is this enlarged portion on the posterior side of the testes, kind of hugs the testes from the back side. So this is epididymis. I believe that's how it's spelled. Next, you have the ductus deferens, which will carry the sperm cells away. And we'll talk about the functions of these in just a second. Here is the ductus deferens, this narrow tube that's going to carry sperm cells away. And it's interesting because it comes from the testes, goes all the way around the bladder, as you could see. It goes to the very posterior side of the bladder. This is the ductus deferens. The very end portion of it, right here, not this one, this is a gland here, this portion, this is called the ampulla of the ductus deferens. This is where the ductus deferens actually ends. And now this tube right here kind of projects from the ampulla into the prostate gland right here. This is called the ejaculatory duct. And here's a better picture over here. Here is the epididymis, ductus deferens, the tube carrying it away all the way around. Ampulla of the ductus deferens. This is the prostate glands. Here is the ejaculatory duct right here. We forgot to go over the urethra actually. And here is the urethra right here, the male urethra. So urethra actually begins right here. To be specific, this is going to be called the prostatic urethra, membranous urethra, and this is the spongy urethra. If you can't remember that at the moment, don't worry about it. We'll talk about it more later. So all of this is the urethra, which is the tube that's going to allow urine out of the body, but also the same tube serves to allow sperm cells and semen out of the body. Okay, let's talk about the functions of those little structures. The epididymis, again, right here, here's the epididymis on the back side of the testes. This is where sperm cells go to mature. When the sperm cells are produced in the testes, they're immature sperm cells. They move into the epididymis region where they mature. So that is the function of the epididymis. Ductus deferens or vas deferens. This is the tube that transports sperm during ejaculation. The end part of this tube is the ampulla of the ductus deferens. We'll take another look at it in just a second. Then you have the ejaculatory duct. The duct is formed by the union of vas deferens and duct of seminal vesicles. I'll show you guys seminal vesicles in just a second. This is a gland. And the ejaculatory duct passes through the prostate gland and opens to the urethra. Okay, let's look at it right here again. Epididymis, ductus deferens right here. Here's the ampulla, the back side of the ductus deferens, so the end portion of the ductus deferens. This is the seminal vesicle. This is a gland that is involved with producing semen. So you could see that the ampulla and the seminal vesicles come together here to form the ejaculatory duct, and the ejaculatory duct connects to the urethra. So the male urethra, much longer than the female urethra, has three parts. There's a prostatic urethra, membranous urethra, and a spongy urethra. This is depending on where it's passing. So this portion over here, this is the prostate gland here. So the portion of the urethra that passes through the prostate gland, all of this is going to be called the prostatic urethra. And next you could see it passing through some muscles and connective tissues here, this portion. This is going to be called the membranous urethra. And when it starts to move into the penile area, it's called the spongy urethra. And now here, this is the spongy urethra. Inside the penis, there's a connective tissue called corpus spongiosum, which is made out of, it's basically a spongy connective tissue. So when the urethra is passing through that, it is called spongy urethra. Again, prostatic urethra, membranous urethra, and spongy urethra. There's also, those were the duct systems in the male reproductive system. Now there's also glands. And when I'm talking about glands, I'm not talking about the testes. Accessory glands is what I'm talking about. They empty their secretion into ducts during ejaculation. These are going to be the glands that help form that fluid component of semen. There's the seminal glands or seminal vesicles, same thing. They come in pairs. Prostate gland, which there's only one of, and then there's also the bulbo-urethral gland, which I believe is in pairs as well. Let's look at it here. Here's the seminal vesicle or seminal gland, right here. Here is the prostate gland over here. And the bulbo-urethral gland is a very tiny gland in the backside of the very end of the penis. So right here, posterior portion, you have this little gland called the bulbo-urethral gland, all which secrete fluids to form semen. Again, right here, seminal vesicle or seminal gland, prostate gland, bulbo-urethral gland. Okay, let's look at each one. The seminal glands or the seminal vesicles, right here, produce 70% of the semen volume, and they produce alkaline fluid containing fructose, sugar, citric acid, enzymes, prostaglandins, and other substances that increase sperm motility and fertilizing ability. Things like fructose are present in semen because the sperm cells need to use it as fuel. Next, we have this prostate gland right here, size of a peach pit, encircles the urethra. As you could see, it's going around the urethra and it's found inferior to the bladder. During ejaculation, the prostatic secretion is released into the urethra. And it also plays an important role in activating sperm cells. And it is the product of the prostate gland is 1/3 of the semen volume. Prostate cancer is the third most common cause of death in men. In men with cancer, so of all deaths that occur with cancer patients, 1/3 of them are due to prostate cancer, and 1 in 6 men will develop it in the United States. Sometimes I'm asked why it is so common. The answer is I can't really find a straightforward answer in any textbook, but it seems to be associated with higher levels of testosterone. It is important to routinely get checked for prostate cancer. There's forms that are aggressive, forms that are less aggressive, but tends to show up more in older men. Again, it's always a good idea to get checked for prostate cancer. Okay, another gland, another accessory gland is the bulbo-urethral gland, located back here, this tiny little gland. It is in pairs, so there's 2 of them. It's pea-sized, produces a clear mucus that drains into the spongy urethra right here, and it is alkaline. So what it does is that it helps neutralize traces of acidic urine that are in the urethra and serves also as a lubricant. Okay, again, sperm cells are the gametes, the cells, and semen is the fluid that's holding it and transporting it and nourishing the sperm cells. Semen is a product of those accessory glands that we just talked about, the fluid portion, and then in combination with sperm, it makes the semen. It's a transport medium, it nourishes the sperm, and provides fuel for sperm ATP synthesis. That's why you have a lot of things like fructose in semen. Here is a sperm cell. We should be familiar with the basic structures of it. This is the head right here. This is the mid piece. And this portion here is the tail. The tail is actually structurally similar to cilia. The difference is cilia moves substances above the cell, it doesn't move the cell. Flagellum moves the cell itself, and the human sperm cell is the only cell in the human body that has the flagella. It's common to see flagellum in bacteria and things like that, but this is the only one in the human body that has it, which helps move the cell. The mid-piece, around this area, you're going to have organelles like mitochondria, and the head is going to contain the DNA, the genetic information. Okay, the scrotum is this sac of skin and fascia outside the abdominopelvic cavity. It is a vulnerable location for the testes to be, but it's also necessary because sperm cells cannot be produced at a regular body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. They need to be around 3 degrees lower. So that's what the scrotum provides, is the right temperature for sperm cell production, 3 degrees lower. Inside the scrotum, there's going to be connective tissues and fascia, but there's two important muscles that we should talk about. There's the dardos muscle and the cremaster muscle. Dardos muscle is a smooth muscle that wrinkles the scrotum, provides some space, potential space. Cremaster muscle is the muscle, it's actually skeletal muscle, and it responds to temperature changes. So when it is cold, the cremaster muscle pulls the testes closer to the abdominopelvic cavity, and when it is hot, it kind of drops them and pulls them further away from the abdominopelvic cavity. So it's kind of helping regulate the right temperature for sperm cell production. Here, if we look at the anterior view of this diagram, it's really hard to see. Here's the scrotum, the skin, and right underneath that, you would see the dardos muscle. Here's the dardos muscle, so it's going to be more superficial. Remember, dardos muscle, right below the skin, it helps wrinkle the skin, provide some potential space. And then the cremaster muscle is this one, which is a little bit deeper, right here, what you're seeing on this one. And this is what will pull the testes closer to the body when the temperature is low, so it responds to temperature changes. Okay, now let's talk about the testes. These are some structures that we need to know. Tunica vaginalis, tunica albuginea, seminiferous tubules, redae testes, epididymis, which we already talked about, testicular arteries and veins. So now we're just looking at the testes. The tunica vaginalis is like this outermost membrane. It's a pouch and it's made out of serous membrane. A little bit like serosa, right here. And right here has like two layers, a visceral and a parietal, and it has this cavity in between them right here. Here's the cavity. So this layer and this layer right here, they form the tunica vaginalis, pouch of serous membrane. Next you have the tunica albuginea. This is a white capsule. This is like a white capsule, white fibrous layer. This is going to be this layer over here, this white layer surrounding the testes, white fibrous capsule surrounding it. This is the tunica vaginalis. I'm sorry, tunica albuginea. And as you can see, the tunica albuginea has these extensions, so it kind of extends inwards into the testes. These are called septum, and it helps form these compartments inside the testes. So this right here, this is the septum. You're going to find seminiferous tubules inside the testes. These tubes right here, these are called seminiferous tubules. This is where sperm cell production begins. So this is like the factory for sperm cells right here. And as you could see, they tightly pack. So these tubes, each one is called a seminiferous tubules, but when they're packed together like this is called a lobule. So this whole thing here is a lobule. And in the very back of the lobules, you can see that there's this area right here where all the tubes are joining together, forming this network over here. This is called the redae testes over here. This is important to keep in mind for your exam. Okay, here's a diagram over here if you need to look at it, the lobules, the septum, everything like that. Okay, we already talked about the epididymis earlier, which hugs the testes posteriorly, right here. All of this is the epididymis. If we wanted to be really specific, this would be like the head of the epididymis, the body, the tail. I'm not going to ask you about that. I just want you to know that it's the epididymis. There's also testicular arteries, which are branching off the abdominal aorta. You can see them right here. There's arteries supplying the testes. There's going to be veins draining the testes right over here. And we could also see the ductus deferens right over here, which is going to carry the sperm away and out of the body. So all of these structures together, testicular arteries, testicular veins, ductus deferens, some nerves in this area, they all form this thing here called the spermatic cord. So I want you to be careful about this. Don't mix up the spermatic cord with the ductus deferens. Ductus deferens is this tube, small narrow tube that's carrying sperm away. Spermatic cord is like this structure that's holding everything in place. So ductus deferens goes through the spermatic cord, but they're not this one and the same thing. Okay, glans penis. It is the enlarged tip of the penis. Prepuce is the skin that covers it. This is the skin that's sometimes surgically removed shortly after birth. This process of removing the foreskin is called circumcision, which literally means cutting around. Well, circumcision is not necessary. It has been shown to reduce the risk of HIV and reproductive infections. 60% of newborns in the United States are circumcised. So again, here's the glans. Penis over here, and you can see the skin that's covering it called the prepuce. One thing I should mention, I think I forgot to put it in my slides, that's the corpus spongiosum and the corpus cavernosum. So those are important to remember. So I'll mention it right now. Those have to do with the tissues that are in the penis. Corpus spongiosum and corpus cavernosum. Let's find corpus cavernosum because that's easier to find. And I believe that's the correct spelling, but you could always look at one of the previous diagrams where everything is labeled. Here on this top part, this tissue over here is called the corpus cavernosum. And again, this is a connective tissue. And then right below that, which around most of the penis, you have the corpus spongiosum. Right here, going around the urethra. And right here. And it actually extends to the very back of the penis and the tissue in the glans penis as well. This is called the corpus spongiosum. The corpus spongiosum is a spongy connective tissue, and also there's going to be some smooth muscles here. So this is what gives the erectile ability to the penis. When male erection occurs, the vascular portions of this tube are going to fill with blood and basically expand the penis and make it more rigid. Now let's go over the female reproductive system. We could divide it into two sections with the female genitalia, female reproductive system. You have the internal genitalia and the external genitalia. Internal genitalia are the ovaries, the ducts that carry the ovaries. Pretty much most of the internal genitalia and ducts are located inside the pelvic cavity. And then external genitalia, which are the external sex organs, and we'll talk about them in a second. The female duct system, unlike the male duct system, the female duct system has little or no contact with the ovaries. An ovulated oocyte, in other words, egg, is released into the peritoneal cavity, and sometimes the oocyte may be lost. If we look at it here, I know it looks like this tube, this fallopian tube here is attached to the ovary, but it's actually not attached to it. It surrounds it, but doesn't really touch it. And when the egg is released, it's supposed to catch it and move it into the tube. So let's look at the duct system. The first part of the duct system are the uterine tubes or fallopian tubes. It's the same, different names for the same thing. So right here, all of this is going to be the uterine tube or the fallopian tube. Fallopian tube is an older name. We usually use the term uterine tube in anatomy. This is the first part of the female duct system, and this is where fertilization typically happens, is in the uterine tube. Okay, these are three different parts of the uterine tube: the infundibulum, the ampulla, and the isthmus. Let's look at the infundibulum first. This is a funnel-shaped region. It is the opening of the uterine tube, and it contains these structures called fimbriae. Let's look at it right here. So this area right here, this is going to be the infundibulum. Same thing over here. This area, this is the infundibulum. Again, it's the opening. It doesn't directly touch the ovaries. And as you can see, it has these processes here called fimbria. They look like fingers. And what they do is that they catch the egg once it is released during ovulation. Next, you have the ampulla. This is the wide opening of the uterine tube, makes half the length of the uterine tube, and this is where fertilization usually happens, in the ampulla. So again, here is the ampulla, comes up to about right here. All of this is going to be the ampulla. Isthmus is the narrow medial third of the uterine tube, and this is the part that empties into the uterus. So here is the isthmus over here, basically the end portion, and it connects to the uterus. The uterus is also, remember this whole thing over here, this muscular organ is the uterus. It is in the pelvic cavity. If you look at it from a sagittal view, it is located between the bladder and the rectum. It is hollow, so it has this empty cavity inside. It is a thick-walled muscular organ. It contains a thick layer of smooth muscles. And this is the organ that nourishes a fertilized ovum. So basically, this is where the baby's going to grow. Okay, the uterus is going to have three parts that you need to remember: the body, the fundus, and the cervix. The fundus is going to be the dome-shaped area. As you remember with the stomach, the dome-shaped area of the stomach was called the fundus. So same thing as the uterus. This top part over here, this is called the fundus. This mid-portion area, this is going to be the body. And the opening area to the uterus is called the cervix. So this structure here, all of this is going to be the cervix. Now the cervix has different anatomical parts. There is a canal here. This is called the cervical canal. And the cervical canal has an internal os and an external os. So you could think about it as the openings. This right here, the external opening, this is called the external os. Internal opening is the internal os. The uterus has several layers. The outermost layer, made out of serosa, that's going to be called the perimetrium. So right here, this outer layer, this is the perimetrium. Myometrium is going to be the muscle. This is what actually causes labor contractions. So this muscle here is called the myometrium. And the innermost layer right here, this dark layer, this is going to be called the endometrium. This is the layer that sheds off during the menstrual cycle. Now the endometrium itself can be divided into two layers: the functional layer, this is the layer that sheds off, and the thickness varies depending on the cycle. So towards the end of the cycle it is thicker, and then sheds off, and then starts to grow again. The basal layer, this is where the germline cells are. So this is the mitotic layer that's giving rise to the cells of the functional layer. Another part of the duct system is the vagina. This is thin wall tube between the bladder and rectum. Extends from the cervix to the exterior of the body. Here are some structures with the external female genitalia that we need to know. The vaginal orifice, this is the opening to the vagina. Hymen, mons pubis, labia majora, labia minora, the clitoris, and the prepuce of the clitoris. Let's look at the external female genitalia. So mons pubis is going to be right here. This is basically a layer of fat or adipose tissue that's covering the pubic symphysis that makes the mons pubis. Clitoris is going to be this erectile tissue here on top, and it does have a tissue similar to corpus cavernosa in here, and it does enlarge during sexual intercourse slightly. Below that you have several openings. So here this is going to be the urethral opening or the urethral orifice. It's opening to the urethra. This is the vaginal orifice or opening to the vagina. Hymen is a tissue that partially covers the vaginal opening in females who've never had intercourse. However, this tissue can rupture through intercourse, but through other things such as sports or use of tampons and etc. So it's a mucous membrane that partially covers the opening to the vagina that can quite easily be ruptured. Some females bleed when they have it ruptured and some don't. And then you have the labia majora right here, which means big lips, enclosing everything in this vestibular portion here. And then this one, this is the labia minora, which encloses these orifices over here. See, did I leave anything out? And the prepuce of the clitoris is the skin that folds over the clitoris. Okay, I just want to make sure that we kind of have everything covered. Keep in mind that there are ligaments here holding the female reproductive system in place, like the ovarian ligament, the round ligament. All of that, I didn't go over it, and it's not necessary for us to know in this course, but I do want to make sure that we understand all the main structures. This is the ovary. Here's the fallopian tube. Remember the parts of the fallopian tube, like the infundibulum right here. Here's the fimbria. Here is the ampulla and the isthmus. The fundus, the body. Here's the cervix, cervical canal, external os, internal os. Remember the layers of the uterus. Here is the vagina over here. And by the way, the vagina also has folds on the inside called the rugae. Now the parts of the vagina that fold inwards are called fornix. Right here, this is the fornix. So this structure here was the cervix, and these parts that fold upwards are called fornix. This is also the female reproductive system, but from the sagittal view, so I want to briefly go over that. Here is the pubic symphysis, so this would be the mons pubis right here. This structure here is the clitoris. Here you have the labia majora and the labia minora. Here are the openings, so this is the urethral orifice opening, and here is the urethra right here. Here's the urinary bladder. This is the vaginal orifice. This is the vagina. And again, here is the cervix. And here's the uterus right here. As you can see, in most people, the uterus actually tilts forward. Here's the ovary right here. Here's the fallopian tube or the uterine tube. And back here, you have the rectum and the anal canal. We should go over stages of follicle development. So in the ovaries, embedded in the ovaries are going to be these sacs called ovarian follicles. And the ovarian follicles contain immature oocytes or eggs. So follicle development and the oocyte development go hand in hand. So once recruited, a follicle and its oocyte require a year to mature and get ready for ovulation. As a result, if you take a look at tissue of the ovaries under the microscope, you could see different follicles at different stages of development. Because several are always happening at the same time. You could see these over here that are larger, the ones that are smaller. These are the early stages of development. These are going to be the later stages of development. First, we begin with primordial follicles. This is the initial follicle that we're going to begin with. So what you're going to see is an egg here. It's an egg with little cells surrounding it. This whole thing forms something called a follicle. So initially, when this is immature, we're beginning with a primordial follicle. And when it is recruited, it begins to grow. The oocyte begins to become larger, and it becomes a primary follicle. Remember, primordial, where there's basically no maturation, and primary is when it's beginning to become mature, the beginning stages. So what actually happens, you have these granulosa cells around it. So let me show you how these changes happen. Here's an egg, and with a primordial follicle, there's a layer of simple squamous epithelium, not epithelium, but squamous epithelial-like cells around it. Again, primordial, and then when it becomes primary, this oocyte or egg in the middle is going to get larger, and these cells around it are going to become cube-shaped. So they don't look simple squamous anymore, they look simple cuboidal. So this is primordial. And this is going to be primary. You can see it right here. Here's a primordial cell. Here's primary right here. This is the initial stage of maturation. the primary follicle eventually becomes a secondary follicle. The pregranulosa cells are going to grow a stratified layer around the oocyte, and as soon as one layer is present, the follicle is now called secondary follicle. And the oocyte, which is the egg, is going to grow tremendously in this stage. So again, we had the primordial, which eventually becomes primary. Here's the egg or the oocyte, and a layer of cube-shaped cells around it. Okay, this is going to be primary. But then it's going to grow, and as soon as there's more than one layer around the egg, now it is called secondary. This is the egg over here, or the oocyte, and the supporting cells around it are called the granulosa cells. This becomes secondary. And then it just continues to grow. Here we can see it primordial, okay, primary, and you have more than one layer of those granulosa cells forming around the oocyte. There's the egg or the oocyte. Here are the granulosa cells around it. As soon as there's more than one layer, it's called secondary. And as you see, what's going to happen is that the egg is going to continue to grow, but also the granulosa cells around the egg are going to continue to multiply. The secondary follicular stage ends when a clear liquid begins to accumulate between the granulosa cells. And these granulosa cells, you're going to see that they're going to have some space between them now, and this space is going to get larger and larger. It's going to form this cavity called the antrum. And when the antrum completely surrounds the oocyte, it's going to be called the corona radiata. Let's look at it over here. Again, primary, this was completely immature follicle. Starting to mature, this simple squamous layer around the oocyte now became simple cuboidal. The simple cuboidal multiplied, became secondary follicle. As you can see, it's going to continue to multiply. And then here, you see this little cavity forming right here. This is called the antrum. And as this follicle continues to grow, this antrum is going to get larger and larger and larger until it's surrounding almost the whole egg or the oocyte right here. So this is now called the corona radiata. And this is a mature follicle that is ready for ovulation. Okay, when the follicle is full size, it's going to bulge against the external ovarian surface like a pimple. So if you look at the ovary, you could see something like a pimple sticking out, and that's actually the egg that's about to be released. The oocyte, which is the egg, and the corona radiata, which is that fluid-filled cavity around it, are going to be ejected from the follicle. And this is when ovulation takes place. So right here, here's the egg or the oocyte. It's going to be released with all the content inside this antrum over here, this fluid. It's going to be released. And then the remainder of this follicle is going to stay inside the ovary. So this is the mature oocyte that is now going to be released and going to move into the fallopian tube. Okay, the remainder of the follicle, so we have those granulosa cells that were surrounding the egg or the oocyte, they're still going to remain in the ovaries. And they're actually going to become this endocrine tissue called corpus luteum. Corpus luteum is going to be responsible for secreting high levels of progesterone and estrogen. If pregnancy doesn't happen, the corpus luteum eventually just degenerates and becomes a scar tissue called corpus albicans. So let's look at these over here. Again, stage 1, this is a primordial. You can see like a simple squamous layer around the oocyte. Now simple cuboidal. This is primary. This is secondary. This, by the way, still secondary right here. Here, this is the end of the secondary stage because you could see those antrums forming right here. Here, you could see that this antrum, this cavity became very large. The follicle is fully mature now. This is called the corona radiata. Here's ovulation. The oocyte is going to be released. And the cells right here are still going to remain. The surrounding cells are going to remain. And they're going to form this structure right here called the corpus luteum. This corpus luteum is responsible for generating high levels of progesterone and estrogen. And eventually, if pregnancy doesn't occur, it's going to degenerate and become the scar tissue here called the corpus albicans. By the way, you should be able to identify it on this picture. This might appear on your exam. So let's start right here. You have you actually can't really see the primordial. So it starts with primordial somewhere around here. Then you have primary. These are going to be the secondary follicles right here. This is an antrum forming, so it's no longer secondary. This antrum is going to grow. Antrum is the cavity, and it's going to form the corona radiata right here. Here's ovulation. The egg is being released. This right here is the corpus albicans. The corpus luteum, which is responsible for generating lots of progesterone and estrogen. And here is the degeneration phase where it becomes the corpus albicans. Okay, guys, this was the end of it for the reproductive system.